Welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm happy to have you with me tonight. In this story, I would love to take you away to another world. A place where you can relax, let go, and simply drift along. Before we begin, feel free to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, so you won't miss any new bedtime stories. Now, get comfortable, and let the story begin.
Chapter 1, The Forge and the Forest. The Mountain's Heart. Deep beneath the iron-spine mountains, where the earth's blood ran hot and molten, Thorin Stonehammer worked his forge. The rhythmic clang of his hammer against glowing steel was a song older than memory, passed down through 17 generations of his clan. At 243 years old, Thorin was considered young by dwarven standards, though his beard had already grown past his belt buckle, braided with iron rings that marked his achievements. His arms were thick as oak branches, scarred by countless sparks and the occasional mishap with molten metal. The forge chamber glowed orange and red, shadows dancing across walls carved with the histories of his people. Here, in the depths, Thorin felt most alive. The stone spoke to him in ways the surface world never could. The craft of ages. Thorin's specialty was weapons. Not the crude instruments of war that humans favored, but true works of art. Each blade he forged carried a piece of his soul, hammered into the metal through sweat and skill and an understanding of or that bordered on the mystical. Tonight, he worked on a commission for the Mountain King himself. A ceremonial axe to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Great Delving. The steel sang beneath his hammer, taking shape slowly, patiently. Rushing ruins the metal, his father had always said. And rushing ruins the dwarf. Thorin smiled at the memory, though his father had been gone these past 60 years. Claimed by a tunnel collapse in the eastern mines. Memories in stone. The walls of Thorin's workshop held more than tools. Carved into alcoves were small treasures. A lock of his mother's hair, preserved in crystal, his father's first hammer, too worn now for use. A sketch of his sister Brenna, who had married into the Goldvein clan 3 mountains over. Family meant everything to dwarves. Their bonds were forged as surely as any metal, tested by time and hardship, emerging stronger for the trials. Yet Thorin remained unmarried, much to his mother's eternal disappointment. The right stone hasn't revealed itself, he would tell her, using the old dwarven phrase for finding one's match. In truth, Thorin wondered if he was meant for a different path entirely. The world above. Once a month, Thorin made the long climb to the surface to trade his wares with the human merchants who gathered at the mountain's base. He despised these trips. The sun too bright, the air too thin, the ground unsettlingly soft beneath his boots. But trade was necessary. Dwarves needed grain and cloth and the occasional luxury that couldn't be mined or forged. In exchange, they offered metalwork that no human smith could match. It was during one such trip that Thorin first heard the name that would change his life. Shadowmere Forest. The humans spoke of it in whispers. A place where elves dwelt. Ancient and dangerous. Stay clear of those woods, an old merchant warned him. The tree folk don't take kindly to outsiders. Ancient grudges. Dwarves and elves had been enemies since before recorded history. The reasons were many and varied, depending on who told the tale. Some said it began with a territorial dispute over the Crystal Vein caverns. Others claimed an elven prince had insulted a dwarven queen. Thorin had grown up on stories of elven treachery. How they looked down upon the mountain folk, calling them stone grubbers and earth burrowers. How they hoarded magical knowledge and refused to share it with the lesser races. Whether the stories were true mattered less than the fact that every dwarf believed them. Hatred of elves was as natural as breathing, as fundamental as the love of stone and metal. Thorin had never actually met an elf. He didn't need to. He already knew everything worth knowing about them. The forest's edge. Far from the mountains, where the land softened into rolling hills and ancient trees. Shad Omer Forest stretched for hundreds of miles. Its canopy was so thick that perpetual twilight reigned beneath, broken only by shafts of golden light that seemed almost magical. This was the domain of the Sylvaneth elves, a people as old as the forest itself. They lived in harmony with the trees, building their homes among the branches, speaking to the wind and the water and the creatures that shared their woodland realm. To outsiders, the forest was forbidding, even terrifying. To the elves, it was home, sanctuary, and sacred ground all in one. Elander's morning. Elander Leaf Whisper woke with the dawn, as he had every morning for the past 412 years. His sleeping platform, woven from living branches high in an ancient oak, swayed gently in the morning breeze. He was tall even by elven standards, with silver-white hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes the color of spring leaves. His features were sharp, almost severe, softened only by the laugh lines around his eyes. Unusual for an elf, who typically showed little emotion. Elander had always been different. Where other elves found contentment in the eternal rhythms of the forest, he felt a restlessness he couldn't name, a longing for something beyond the familiar paths. The healer's gift. Unlike most elven males, who trained as warriors or scholars, Elander had chosen the path of the healer. It was considered unusual, even slightly shameful. Healing was traditionally women's work among the Sylvaneth. But Elander had a gift. His hands could sense injury and illness, could coax broken bones to mend and fevered blood to cool. The forest spirits whispered secrets to him, revealing which herbs to gather, which songs to sing over the wounded. "You have your grandmother's touch," his mother often said, and it was the highest compliment she could give. His grandmother had been the greatest healer in 3 generations, beloved by all who knew her. Elander hoped to honor her memory. Whispers of the outside. The Sylvaneth kept themselves apart from the world beyond the forest. Humans were tolerated at the borders, allowed to trade for elven crafts and medicines. Dwarves were forbidden entirely. Their presence was said to poison the very soil they walked upon. Elander had always questioned these restrictions. "How can we judge those we've never met?" he once asked his father, earning a sharp rebuke. "The mountain dwellers are destroyers," his father had said. "They tear open the earth, poison rivers with their mining, care nothing for the living world. This is not prejudice, my son. This is truth, witnessed by our ancestors." Elander had nodded and said nothing more. But the questions remained. 2 worlds apart. And so they lived, the dwarf and the elf, separated by miles and mountains and centuries of hatred. Thorin hammered his steel in the depths of the earth while Elander tended his herbs beneath the forest canopy. Neither knew the other existed. Neither could have imagined that fate was already weaving their paths together, drawing them toward a meeting that would challenge everything they believed. For in the spaces between their worlds, something dark was stirring. Something that cared nothing for the ancient feuds of elves and dwarves. Something that would force two enemies to become allies. Or watch everything they loved burn. The stone and the leaf had yet to meet. But their time was coming. Chapter 2. Unlikely Paths Cross. The Merchant's Warning. The trouble began with a rumor. Travelers spoke of shadows moving in the Grey Mist Valley. The narrow strip of land that separated the Ironspine Mountains from Shadowmere Forest. Caravans had gone missing. Scouts sent to investigate never returned. Thorin heard the stories during his monthly trading trip and dismissed them as human superstition. Shadows didn't move on their own. And caravans went missing all the time. Bandits, weather, simple bad luck. But when the Mountain King summoned him to the throne room, Thorin realized the situation was more serious than he'd thought. "We've lost contact with the Copperdeep outpost," the king said, his ancient face grave. 40 dwarves, gone without a trace. I need someone to investigate. A reluctant mission. Thorin wanted to refuse. He was a smith, not a warrior or scout. But the king's word was law, and besides, his cousin Bram had been stationed at Copperdeep. He packed light, his father's hammer, a short sword, provisions for a week. The journey would take him through the Grey Mist Valley. Uncomfortably close to elven territory, but there was no other route. "Watch yourself out there," his mother said as he departed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The surface world is treacherous." "I'll be back before you know it," Thorin promised, hoping it was true. The climb to the surface took half a day. When he emerged into the pale morning light, he felt the familiar discomfort of open sky above him. Nothing solid overhead. Into the valley. The Grey Mist Valley earned its name from the perpetual fog that clung to its low places. Even at midday, visibility rarely exceeded 100 feet. The ground was soft and treacherous, dotted with sinkholes and hidden streams. Thorin hated every step of it. He moved carefully, his dwarven senses alert for any sign of danger. The silence bothered him most. No birds sang, no insects hummed. The valley felt dead, or worse, waiting. On the second day, he found the first body. A dwarf, still in his mining gear, lying face down in the mud. When Thorin turned him over, he recoiled in horror. The dwarf's face was frozen in a scream, his eyes wide and white, as if he'd died of pure terror. The forest's edge. Aelander had also been sent on a mission, though his was one of healing rather than investigation. A group of elven scouts had ventured too close to the valley's edge and returned. Changed. Silent, trembling, unable to speak of what they'd seen. The healers of Shadowmere had tried everything, but the scouts remained trapped in their waking nightmares. In desperation, the Elder Council had sent Aelander to gather moonpetal flowers, which grew only in the valley's heart. Their essence was the last hope. "Be swift," the High Priestess had warned him. "The valley has grown dark. Even our sight cannot penetrate its shadows." Aelander had set out at dawn, armed with his healer's satchel and a slender bow he barely knew how to use. Shadows gather. They entered the valley from opposite ends, unaware of each other's presence. The fog swallowed them both, muffling sound, distorting distance. Thorin found more bodies as he pressed deeper. Dwarves, humans, even a few horses. All wore the same expression of absolute terror. Whatever had killed them left no wounds, no signs of struggle. They had simply stopped. Ailander noticed the silence first. The valley should have been alive with small creatures, insects, the whisper of wind through grass. Instead, there was nothing. Even his elven senses, usually so sharp, felt muffled, as if wrapped in thick cloth. Both felt the wrongness in the air, a pressure against their minds that grew stronger with each step. The creature revealed. Thorin saw it first. A shape in the fog, darker than the surrounding gray. It moved without sound, flowing rather than walking, and where it passed, the very grass withered and died. A dreadwraith. He'd heard stories, dismissed them as legend. The creatures were said to be born from concentrated despair, feeding on fear and leaving only empty husks behind. He should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. But his legs wouldn't obey. Frozen by a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The dreadwraith turned toward him, and Thorin felt its attention like a physical weight. His vision darkened at the edges. His heart stuttered in his chest. This was how he would die. An arrow in the dark. The arrow came from nowhere, trailing silver light. It struck the dreadwraith's center mass and exploded in a burst of radiance that sent the creature reeling backward with an inhuman shriek. Thorin's paralysis broke. He stumbled, gasping, as a tall figure emerged from the fog. An elf, bow raised, another gleaming arrow already knocked. "Run, you fool," the elf shouted in accented common. "The light won't hold it long." Every fiber of Thorin's being rebelled at taking orders from an elf. But the dreadwraith was already reforming. Its darkness coalescing around the fading light. He ran. Reluctant alliance. They fled together through the fog, the elf's longer legs forcing Thorin to sprint at full speed. Behind them, the dreadwraith's shriek echoed, closer with each passing moment. "There." The elf pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. "The stones will slow it." They scrambled up the rocks, the elf pulling Thorin the last few feet with surprising strength. The dreadwraith reached the base and stopped, circling, unable or unwilling to follow onto the bare stone. For a long moment, dwarf and elf simply stared at each other, gasping for breath. Thorin saw silver hair, leaf-green eyes, features too perfect to be natural. The elf saw a stocky figure covered in mud, beard tangled, eyes full of suspicion and grudging gratitude. "I am Ailander," the elf said finally. "And I believe we have a problem. Trapped together." The dreadwraith circled their rocky refuge as night fell, patient as death itself. Neither Thorin nor Ailander could leave without facing the creature, and Ailander's supply of enchanted arrows was limited. 3 left, he admitted when Thorin asked. "I wasn't expecting to fight a legend." They sat on opposite sides of the outcropping, as far apart as the small space allowed. The silence between them was thick with centuries of mutual hatred. "Why did you save me?" Thorin finally asked. "Your kind has no love for dwarves." Ailander was quiet for a moment. "I am a healer," he said. "I do not choose who to save based on the shape of their ears." It wasn't much of an answer. But it was enough to keep Thorin from saying something he might regret. Chapter 3. Breaking stones, bending branches. The long night. They kept watch in shifts, though neither truly slept. The dreadwraith's presence pressed against their minds, probing for weakness, searching for the fear it craved. Thorin found himself talking to stay awake, telling stories of the mountain. The great halls, the endless mines, the beauty of crystal formations that no surface dweller would ever see. Ailander listened without comment, but his expression shifted from disdain to something approaching interest. "Your people truly live underground?" he asked during his watch. "Never seeing the sky?" "The sky is overrated," Thorin grunted. "Too much nothing. Give me good solid stone any day." Ailander almost smiled. Almost. Dawn's respite. With the first light of dawn, the Dreadwraith retreated, dissolving into the shadows like smoke in wind. It would return with nightfall. They both knew this. But for now, they had a chance. "We need to reach the valley's heart," Ailander said, gathering his things. "There's a shrine there, ancient even by elven standards. Its light might be strong enough to destroy the creature. And you know this how?" "Old stories. The same ones that told of Dreadwraiths." Ailander met Thorin's skeptical gaze. "Your people aren't the only ones with legends, dwarf." Thorin considered arguing, considered striking out on his own. But alone, he'd be dead by nightfall. "Lead the way, elf." "But if this is a trap? If I wanted you dead, I would have let the creature have you." Learning to walk together. They made an odd pair, moving through the fog. The tall elf with his graceful stride, the stocky dwarf stumping along beside him. Their pace was a constant negotiation, Ailander slowing, Thorin pushing harder. "You move like a wounded bear," Ailander observed. "You move like you're dancing at a fancy party." "We're not here to look pretty." Despite themselves, they fell into a rhythm. Ailander's keen eyes spotted dangers ahead. Thorin's knowledge of stone and soil kept them from sinkholes and unstable ground. By midday, they'd covered more distance than either could have managed alone. "Not bad," Thorin admitted grudgingly. "For an elf." "Adequate," Ailander replied. "For a dwarf." Stories exchanged. During a rest break, Ailander asked about the dwarven bodies Thorin had found. The dwarf's face darkened as he described his cousin Bram, who might be among the dead. "I'm sorry," Ailander said, and meant it. "I know what it is to lose family." "Do you?" Thorin's voice was sharp. "I thought elves lived forever." "We live long. Not forever. And there are worse things than death." Ailander's eyes grew distant. "My sister walked into the fading 3 centuries ago. When an elf loses the will to live, they simply diminish. Become less, until nothing remains." Thorin had no response to that. He'd never considered that elves might grieve, might suffer. Might be anything other than the arrogant immortals of his childhood stories. The shrine appears. They found the shrine as the sun began its descent. A circle of standing stones surrounding a crystal pillar that pulsed with soft white light. Even through the fog, its radiance was visible. A beacon of hope in the grey wasteland. "The pillar of first dawn," Ailander breathed. "I thought it was only a myth." "Lot of myths turning out to be real today," Thorin muttered. But even he felt the pillar's warmth, a gentle pressure against the cold dread that had settled in his bones. They approached cautiously. The ground around the shrine was clear of fog, the grass green and healthy. Whatever power the pillar held, it had kept this small circle safe. "We stay here tonight," Ailander decided. "The creature won't be able to reach us." Walls begin to crack. Safe within the shrine's light, they finally allowed themselves to relax. Ailander shared his provisions. elven whey bread and dried fruit, while Thorin contributed dwarven trail rations. Dense and filling if not particularly flavorful. "This tastes like rock," Aylander said, chewing gamely. "That's theite. Good for the bones." They talked through the evening, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Aylander spoke of his work as a healer, the satisfaction of mending what was broken. Thorin described his forge, the meditation of hammer and steel. "We're not so different," Aylander observed. "Both creators, in our way." Thorin wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The elf had a point, much as it pained him to admit it. The creature returns. The Dreadwraith came with full dark, larger now, stronger. It had fed on the fear of other travelers, grown fat on terror. It circled the shrine's boundary, shrieking its frustration at the light that held it back. "It's testing the barrier," Aylander said, watching the creature probe for weaknesses. "The pillar's power isn't infinite. If we stay too long, then we don't stay." Thorin hefted his hammer. "We end this. Tonight. That's suicide. We can't fight that thing directly." "No. But maybe we don't have to." Thorin studied the pillar. His craftsman's eye noting its structure. "This crystal, it's storing light, releasing it slowly. What if we could release it all at once?" A desperate plan. They worked through the night, combining their knowledge. Aylander understood the magical principles. Thorin understood the physical structure. Together, they devised a plan. The pillar could be overloaded, forced to release all its stored light in a single burst. The explosion would destroy the Dreadwraith. But it would also destroy the shrine, leaving them exposed. "We'll have seconds to run," Aylander calculated. "Maybe less. Then we run fast." Thorin met the elf's eyes. "I've got short legs, but they're strong. You might have to carry me." Aylander laughed. Actually laughed. "I never thought I'd carry a dwarf anywhere except to a grave. Life's full of surprises." Thorin grinned despite himself. "Ready? Ready." Light triumphant. Thorin struck the pillar's base with his hammer while Aylander sang a word of power, ancient syllables that resonated with the crystal's heart. The pillar cracked. Light bleeding from the fractures. Building. Building. Now. They ran as the world turned white behind them. The Dreadwraith's final shriek was swallowed by the explosion, a sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once. The shockwave lifted them off their feet, sent them tumbling through suddenly clear air. When Thorin opened his eyes, the fog was gone. The valley lay revealed under starlight. Peaceful and still. Where the shrine had stood, only a crater remained. Edges still glowing faintly. Of the Dreadwraith, there was no sign. "We did it," Aylander said, wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." Thorin sat up, every muscle aching. "Not bad. For an elf and a dwarf." Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. Aftermath. They made camp in the cleansed valley, too exhausted to travel further. The night was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. Small creatures emerged from hiding, reclaiming their home. Thorin found himself watching Aylander tend to their minor injuries, the elf's hands gentle and sure. It was strange, feeling grateful to someone he'd been raised to hate. "Why did you really save me?" he asked again. "Back at the beginning. The truth." Aylander was silent for a long moment. Because I was tired, he finally said. Tired of hating people I'd never met. Tired of following rules that made no sense. When I saw you about to die, I just acted. Sounds familiar, Thorin admitted. The weight of history. As they traveled back toward their respective homes, they talked about the hatred between their peoples. Ailander shared the elven perspective. Centuries of watching dwarves strip mine mountains, poison rivers, destroy ancient groves. We saw you as a plague, he said. Locusts in humanoid form, consuming everything in your path. Thorin bristled, then forced himself to listen. And we saw you as arrogant tyrants. Hoarding magic, looking down on everyone else, refusing to share knowledge that could help millions. Both views have some truth, Ailander acknowledged. And both are incomplete. So how do we fix it? I don't know. But perhaps it starts with two people, talking instead of fighting. Thorin's confession. They stopped at a stream to refill their water skins, and Thorin found himself speaking of things he'd never told anyone. I've always felt like an outsider, he admitted. Among my own people. They're content with the old ways, the old hatreds. I ask questions, and they look at me like I've grown a second head. I understand that feeling well, Ailander said. The Sylvaneth value tradition above all. To question is to betray. Maybe that's why we work together. Two misfits who don't fit anywhere else. Ailander smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps we're the beginning of something new. The first stones of a bridge between our peoples. That's very poetic. Very elven. I'll take that as a compliment. Ailander's burden. That night, Ailander shared his own secret shame. His sister hadn't simply faded. She'd fallen in love with a human, been forbidden to see him, and chosen oblivion over a life without love. The elders said she was weak, Ailander said, his voice tight. That she'd brought dishonor to our family. But I saw her face when they told her she could never see him again. That wasn't weakness. That was a heart breaking. And you've carried that anger ever since. I've carried the question, what gives anyone the right to decide who we can love? Who we can befriend? Ailander met Thorin's eyes. The answer is, nothing. No one has that right. Thorin nodded slowly. No one. The border approaches. They reached the edge of Shadowmere Forest on the fourth day. The trees rose before them like a green wall, ancient and imposing. Somewhere beyond lay Ailander's home. And the end of their journey together. I should go alone from here, Ailander said. If my people saw me with a dwarf. I know. Thorin felt an unexpected pang of loss. Will I see you again? I don't know. The elders won't approve of what I've done. There may be consequences. Same for me. The Mountain King won't be happy that I befriended an elf instead of killing one. They stood in awkward silence, two people who had become friends against all odds, facing a world that would never understand. A promise made. Meet me here, Thorin said suddenly. 1 month from today. Same spot. Ailander raised an eyebrow. And if we're both exiled or imprisoned? Then we'll have plenty of time to meet. Thorin extended his hand. A human gesture, but one both races understood. I don't know what happens next. But I know I don't want this to be goodbye. Ailander clasped his hand, his grip surprisingly strong. 1 month. I'll be here. Bring some of that whey bread. It's not as bad as I pretended. Bring some of your rock rations. They're exactly as bad as I said, but I've developed a taste for them. They parted with something neither had expected. Hope. Thorin's return. The Mountain King received Thorin's report in stony silence. The Dreadwraith, the lost dwarves, the destruction of the ancient shrine. All of it paled beside one fact. You worked with an elf, the king said. Fought beside one. Befriended one. I did what was necessary to survive and complete my mission. You could have killed him after. Restored honor. Thorin met the king's gaze steadily. He saved my life. Among dwarves, that creates a debt. I won't dishonor my people by betraying someone who showed me mercy. The king was silent for a long moment. You walk a dangerous path, Stonemer. I hope. You know what you're doing. So did Thorin. Aelander's reckoning. The Elder Council was less forgiving. Aelander stood before them, head unbowed, as they pronounced their judgment. You have consorted with the enemy. Shared our secrets. Brought shame upon your family. I saved lives, Aelander replied. Including my own. The dwarf and I destroyed a creature that had killed dozens. Is that not worth something? The ends do not justify the means. You are forbidden from leaving the forest for 1 year. You will speak of this to no one. It was a light sentence, all things considered. But as Aelander left the council chamber, he knew one thing with certainty. In 1 month, he would be at that border, regardless of any prohibition. Some rules were meant to be broken. Chapter 5. A New Dawn. The longest month. The weeks crawled by for both of them. Thorin threw himself into his work, forging with a fury that produced some of his finest pieces. But his mind was elsewhere, counting days, wondering if Aelander would come. In Shadowmere, Aelander tended his patience and gathered his herbs, all while planning his escape. The Forest Watch had been doubled since his return, but he knew paths they didn't. Secret ways through the ancient trees. Both found themselves changed by their experience. The old hatreds felt hollow now, echoes of someone else's anger. They had seen the truth. That beneath the surface differences. Elf and dwarf were not so different after all. Whispers of change. Word of the Dreadwraith's destruction spread through both kingdoms. The valley was safe again, trade could resume, lives had been saved. And slowly, the story of how it happened began to circulate. An elf and a dwarf, working together, the merchants whispered. Impossible, but true. Some dismissed it as fantasy. Others wondered. If two ancient enemies could unite against a common threat, what else might be possible? In the Mountain King's court, younger dwarves began asking questions. In the Sylvaneth Council, junior members raised tentative objections to the old policies. Change, like water, finds the cracks in even the hardest stone. The secret meeting. 1 month to the day, Thorin waited at the forest's edge. He told no one where he was going, slipped away in the pre-dawn darkness like a thief. The sun rose. Morning became afternoon. Doubt crept in. Perhaps Aelander had been caught. Perhaps he'd changed his mind. Perhaps. You came. Thorin spun to find Aelander emerging from the trees, looking tired but triumphant. Of course I came. Did you doubt me? Never, Thorin lied. Well. Maybe a little. I had to take the long way. The elders have eyes everywhere. Ailander smiled. But I'm here. And I brought way bread. I brought ale. Dwarven ale. You're going to hate it. I'm looking forward to hating it. Building bridges. They met monthly after that, always in secret, always at the border. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, two friends who had no need for constant words. Thorin taught Ailander about metalwork, the poetry of forge and flame. Ailander taught Thorin about healing herbs. The songs that could mend flesh and bone. They exchanged knowledge their peoples had kept separate for millennia. We're committing treason, Ailander observed one evening. By every law of both our peoples. Probably, Thorin agreed. Does that bother you? Not as much as it should. Me neither. The crisis. 6 months into their friendship, disaster struck. A plague swept through the dwarven mines, a sickness no healer could cure. Dozens fell ill, then hundreds. The Mountain King himself was bedridden. Thorin knew only one person who might help. But asking meant revealing everything, risking exile or worse. He didn't hesitate. I need your help, he told Ailander at their next meeting. My people are dying. Our healers have tried everything. Ailander listened to the symptoms, his expression growing grave. I know this sickness. It's rare, but treatable. With elven medicine. Will you help? You know what you're asking. If I'm caught. I know. I'm asking anyway. The healing. Ailander came to the mountain in secret, guided by Thorin through passages known only to the Stonemar clan. He worked through the night, brewing remedies, singing healing songs, teaching dwarven healers techniques they'd never seen. By dawn, the fever had broken in the worst cases. Within a week, the plague was contained. Within a month, it was gone entirely. The Mountain King summoned Thorin to his chambers, still weak but recovering. An elf saved us, the king said. Your elf. He's not my elf. He's my friend. The king was silent for a long moment. Perhaps, he said finally. It's time we reconsidered some of our older policies. New beginnings. The changes came slowly, as all true changes do. First, a tentative trade agreement between the mountain and the forest. Then, an exchange of healers. Then, for the first time in recorded history, an official meeting between the Mountain King and the Sylvaneth Elder. Council. Thorin and Ailander stood together at that historic gathering, no longer hiding their friendship. There were still those who disapproved, who clung to the old hatreds. But they were fewer now, their voices growing quieter. We did this, Ailander said, watching the leaders shake hands. Two misfits who didn't fit anywhere. We built a bridge, Thorin agreed. Now others can cross it. Very poetic. Very dwarven. I'll take that as a compliment. The stone and the leaf. Years passed. The friendship between elf and dwarf deepened, became legendary. Songs were written about them, stories told to children of both races. Thorin eventually became master smith of the Iron Spine Mountains, his works prized by elves and dwarves alike. Ailander rose to high healer of Shadowmere, his techniques blending the best of both traditions. They still met at the border, though now they could do so openly. Sometimes they talked of politics and progress. Sometimes they simply sat together, old friends who had changed the world. Do you ever wonder, Ailander asked one evening, what would have happened if we'd never met? The Dreadwraith would have killed us both. The plague would have destroyed my people. The hatred would have continued forever. So our meeting was fate? Thorin shrugged. Fate, luck, or just two stubborn fools too stupid to hate each other properly? Does it matter? No, Ailander smiled. I suppose it doesn't. Ever after. The story of Thorin and Ailander became a legend, passed down through generations. It was told to dwarven children in their stone cradles and elven youth in their treetop beds. It became a symbol of what was possible when fear gave way to understanding. The world was not perfect, it never would be. Old prejudices lingered in dark corners, and there were still those who preferred hatred to hope. But the bridge had been built, and more crossed it every year. And somewhere, in the space between mountain and forest, two old friends still met to share stories and silence, ale and waybread. The bond between them stronger than any stone, more enduring than any tree. For in the end, the greatest magic was not in ancient shrines or mystical creatures. It was in the simple act of seeing another person. Truly seeing them. And choosing friendship over fear. The stone and the leaf had found each other. And the world was better for it. The end.
Thank you for listening to this story. I wish you a wonderful, peaceful night and sweet dreams. If you enjoyed the story, please follow the channel and leave a like, so you won't miss any new bedtime stories. Sleep well, and see you soon.